The Russian bayonet. Oh, this expression brings horror to the users of social networks, conspiracy theorists, and people like those. These guys are having lots of fun. They're calling the Russian bayonet the bayonet of quadrangular shape, created way back in 1870. They give it unimaginable properties on par with a Jedi sword. They say it's a purely Russian weapon, it's much better than the Western analogs, and my favorite, that it's forbidden by the Geneva Convention. Honestly, I also believed all these stories until I started preparing for this video. And actually, the motivation to forbid this weapon by the Geneva Convention, there are two. Actually one, but it's all connected with the wounds this horrible bayonet makes. It pertains to both the triangular and the quadrangular bayonets. The story is that when such a quadrangular shape enters the body gets a cross-section wound, and such wounds are very hard to heal. The same story about the triangular bayonet. And there are two versions about that. The first one is that this wound is very hard to close. The bleeding is very hard and it's very hard to stop it. And it's inhumane to kill people like that. And the second version is that these wounds will close much better than those made by a regular knife, but at the same time there was huge internal bleeding, and that it's also very hard to cure. So the point is that it's inhumane. And actually yes, in the Geneva Convention there are points forbidding inhumane killings, such as it's forbidden to use weapons, armaments and substances that can cause excessive sufferings. But there's not a single word forbidding such bayonets there. Personally, I couldn't find a document to confirm that. But speaking about the bayonet to the Mosin rifle, there are some statistics saying that the German soldiers wounded by a regular bayonet, a plain one as we call it, would spend 18 days in the hospital. But the soldiers wounded by the quadrangular bayonet from the Mosin rifle would spend 28 days in the hospital. So it took the Reich's leadership much more efforts to cure the soldiers. I don't know how true it is. Actually, for the first time, the bayonets would appear in the middle of the 17th century in France, in the city of Bayonet. That's how they were called, bayonets or bagonets. Actually, it was just a dagger that you would insert into the muzzle of a musket. And it was mostly a way of protect the musketeers from cavalry, nothing else. And in general, it was quite an unwieldy thing. It would fall off the barrel, or it would get stuck in there when a soldier would like to shoot and he couldn't. But the idea of combining a dagger with a rifle was very popular. And then, the bayonet were accustomed to appeared. The faceted one. Back then, the ideas of cold weapons spread very fast around Europe. So it's hard to say when exactly the quadrangular bayonet appeared in Russia. But it's considered to be adopted by the Russian army in 1870. It was used with a standard rifle, and a little later with a dragoon version of this rifle. A little bit later, in 1891, the Russian army adopted the legendary Mosin rifle. It's also called the Mosin, the gun rifle of the three-linear rifle. And of course, the quadrangular bayonet, in its new incarnation, moved to this rifle. It was actually a very formidable weapon of close combat. Just look how far it could impale the enemy. And the size of the bayonet could impale the enemy all the way through. The tip of the bayonet is sharpened as a screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver. I don't know why, although I actually studied the original manual for the Mosin rifle. It doesn't say anything about that. But I suppose there are two reasons for such a tip. First of all, it minimized the chance for the soldier to get wounded by his own bayonet, because he's running around, he doesn't want to get impaled on his own bayonet. And secondly, such shape made the bayonet more reliable. There's less possibility of breaking it, doesn't need sharpening, but it's just as effective in hitting the enemy. And of course, you can also use it as a screwdriver. Actually, in the manual for the Mosin rifle, it's specified that there are special tools for disassembling the rifle, so it's not meant for using for that. But in the case you lose all your tools, you may. Actually, the Mosin rifle had several bayonets. There are some of them. In the 1920s, a new shape of the bayonet was suggested that would allow the specially protected fighters to practice bayonet fight with each other. The training bayonet was different from the fighting one, both in the shape of the blade and in the fastening. The fastenings were made as two metal plates with holes for screws or rivets. In between the plates, there was a bending imitation bayonet, which would be the same in size and in shape with the actual bayonet. To make it safer, the fighting end would be bent into a loop, the so-called siege bayonet. It was made from 1941 to 1944 in the city of Leningrad during the siege. It would be fixed to the rifle, just like the bayonets made in 1891 to 1930. It's a one-blade bayonet with the fuller on each side. It would be fixed to the rifle with a tube and a spring-loaded latch that would be attaching to the rifle behind the front sight. These bayonets seem to have been made at several different factories because they vary widely in size, shape, thickness, the fuller placement and the quality of finishing. Check out this bayonet for the Mosin rifle. It's the Russian experimental bayonet of 1905. They started using it during the Russian-Japanese War in 1904-1905, but mostly it found its practical use during the First World War. The aim of the makers was simple: to give this weapon some cutting and chopping properties by sacrificing some impaling qualities, so they tried to make it more universal by making it less effective. The soldiers didn't like this one, and they didn't make a lot of them. Another fun fact: they made a special device attached to this bayonet to cut the wires. So if you imagine that you would need to carry this huge machine, the battle efficiency of this device would be very doubtful. I also found one article that they were trying to make a quadrangular bayonet that would be foldable along the rifle's barrel, just like they made for the SKS rifles later on. But as far as I was able to find out, this construction of the bayonet was not very popular. Although there is an opinion that closer to the end of the Second World War they did make some Mosin rifles with this modification. Vitaly, I have another knife here. Is it also for the Mosin? No. This bayonet is not for the Mosin rifle, it's made for its competitor, another most massively produced rifle of the middle of the 20th century. It's the German rifle Mauser 98K, or sometimes call it Kar 98. It is widely considered that there were 37 million of Mosin rifles made, and there were only 17 million of the Mauser 98K. Both of these rifles are bolt-action rifles, and they were made practically at the same time. Of course, Mauser has its benefits, but if we're speaking about sniper fire, then definitely the Mosin is an undisputed leader. The trilinear rifle could shoot up to 2 kilometers. The Mauser 98K could shoot only 1.5 kilometers far. Of course, very few people could shoot so far. They would usually use it at the distance of 500 meters. And of course, the legendary Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev was armed with the Mosin rifle. During the Stalingrad battle, he destroyed 225 soldiers of the enemy, including 16 snipers. Actually, the story of Vasily Zaitsev inspired the amazing movie Enemy at the Gate. So if you haven't watched it yet, I definitely recommend it, especially since the 9th of May, the Victory Day, is close. Speaking about the bayonets, you would ask, why would a sniper rifle need a bayonet? Actually, the Mosin had some options with a shortened barrel for regular soldiers. That's where the bayonet would be most useful. Just like the Mauser 98K is a carabiner, a modification of the Mauser 98 rifle, which was made some 37 years before. So in general, the story of these two rifles is very similar, but the bayonets are very different. Then the war was over, and the countries started making more complicated weaponry. Like in 1947, the not less legendary AK-47 appeared. But for the Kalashnikov rifles, they were using completely different bayonets. And you can see my video about them, which I made quite long ago, but it's very informative. Here's the link. By the way, quite recently we have attended the manufacturing facility of Campo in Orekhovo-Zuyeva, where they're making the most modern bayonets for the Kalashnikov rifles. Another link is here. But the era of the needle-like bayonets, at least in Russia, was over at the end of the Second World War. By the way, here are some fun facts for you. Since the bayonet attached to a rifle was not the best weapon for ditch fighting, which was demonstrated by the Winter War between Russia and Finland, for the ditch warfare they created quite famous knife, even today, an R40, but it was mostly made for machine gunners. Then there was the cherry knife, made in 1943, which also proved to be very effective. And it was the predecessor to the later created bayonet for the Kalashnikov rifles. Another fun fact, I don't know how true it is, quite a long time ago I found an article about training for the bayonet fighting. The story was that the mannequin made out of straw, where they would be practicing impaling thrusts with a bayonet, with a Mosin rifle. They would hang these dummies or put a special frame for that. But there was a problem. When the soldiers would get into the real fight and would impale somebody on the bayonet, the body would fall and the bayonet would also fall down. And it was a problem to stick it out of the body. The bayonet would get stuck, and the soldiers, it would be hard for them to train like that. So I think in Germany they made special dummies that would also fall. So it's a straw dummy on the special wooden frame, and when the soldier would practice, it would thrust it with the bayonet and the dummy would fall. So the next stage of training was to take it out again so that it doesn't get stuck in the lying body. Nowadays very few people can say whether it's true or not, because more than 75 years have passed since the end of the Second World War. And the story, as we know, is the most lying science. So you should decide what you believe and what you don't. It was the story of the legendary Mosin rifle and its not less legendary Quadrangular Russian Bayonet. That's it for now. Have a good one. See you online.